Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Man, I gotta tell you, I feel as if I have not recorded a Morrissey Monday episode in quite some time. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. My wife and I have been doing some very serious adulting over the past couple of weeks, and to be honest with you, I have just not had as much time as I normally do to spend in the toy aisle of life. That being said, it's very nice to be back here with you once again today. Here to wish you a very happy Morrissey Monday, a celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. And you know what, man? Today isn't even Monday. So on top of my multiple week absence, I'm also a couple days late with this week's episode, so I do apologize. But for this week's episode, we're going to go back and take a look at my personal collection of live Morrissey shows that I have been collecting over the course of my 30-plus years of fandom. Now, I think I've explained on this channel many times in the past that my Morrissey fandom was born in the spring of 1994. It was my senior year of high school, and at the time, my government class was getting ready to take a field trip from our little hamlet up in Northern California down to the hustle and bustle of our state capital in Sacramento, California. Now, on this particular field trip, my 12th grade government class were going to have an opportunity to set in on a session of the California State Assembly, as well as meet our local assemblyman at the time. This was a guy by the name of Bernie Richter. And based on the fact that we were sort of a bunch of bumpkins from the mountains of Northern California, our teacher decided that it would be in our best interest if we teamed up with a travel buddy as we headed down to the big city. And I got to tell you right now, if you're somebody that refers to Sacramento as the big city, you, sir, are a bumpkin. I don't know what to tell you, but this was something based on my experience in high school that I was not particularly looking forward to. I basically had one friend in high school, basically dating all the way back from 7th grade to the end of high school, and this particular friend was not in this class with me, which meant I was going to have to travel with somebody that I was unfamiliar with, which I got to tell you at the time created a tremendous amount of anxiety for me. But looking back on it, I'm tremendously grateful for this particular experience. Now, the teachers sort of paired the people together. We weren't necessarily able to choose our travel buddies ourselves, and I've always gotten the sense that the teacher happened to place me with the person that I had to use as my travel buddy, because despite the fact that this other kid, and I don't remember his name at this point in time, I'm not saying that in order to be a jerk, I'm saying that because it was 30 years ago, and apart from this one day that he and I spent traveling to Sacramento and back together, this was somebody that I probably said less than 8 words to my entire life. But I get the sense that the teacher paired the two of us together because we were sort of the two weird kids in the class that wore band shirts. And I remember the day before the field trip, the two of us, he and I, got together. And, of course, he and I were both really into music. And he told me, he's like, hey, man, why don't you bring some CDs? I will bring some CDs. And if nothing else, probably because he didn't want to spend the trip talking to me, which I don't blame him for, he's like, hey, bring some music, I'll bring some music, we'll swap and switch, we'll trade, we'll talk about the bands that we like. And I thought to myself, all right, that sounds pretty snug. And the next day, when we got on the bus, he and I started our travels together, and not long into our trip, he offered up to me an album by an artist that I was familiar with, but somebody that I had not spent any amount of time listening to, based on sort of a preconceived prejudice that I had against this artist based on the people in my high school that used to wear his shirts. And looking back on it, that was an ignorant stance. Now, can you imagine me having an ignorant stance? I know that probably just baffles you, but I just, at the time, in my high school, I did not particularly like the fans of this artist or his previous band. So as we were on the road down to Sacramento, he offered up this CD, The Illustrious Bone and Drag. And he said, hey man, have you ever listened to this album? And admittedly, I was like, no, I don't think I have. Now, at this point in time, by the time I was in 12th grade in high school, I was really into bands. Let me give you a little bit of who I was listening to in 12th grade. I was really into the sort of grunge thing, which most people were at that point in time. I'm not saying that as if it makes me unique. It's just the case. I was really into a lot of the Seattle bands, but I also loved the Dead Milkmen. I loved the Butthole Surfers. I loved Rollins. I loved Black Flag and things like that. And to me, Morrissey and the Smiths were music that were not really my thing, at least in my head. Now, I hadn't ever listened to this album. Of course, as I mentioned before, I knew who Morrissey was and I knew who the Smiths were, but I had this prejudice in my head based on like the cool kids that I went to high school with who all loved Morrissey and the Smiths. He's like, here, man, you got to listen to this CD. And at first, I sort of rejected it. I said, no, I'm okay. What else you got in there? I don't really like Morrissey. I said those words. I said those words out loud in public. I said I don't really like Morrissey. And this kid looked at me sort of perplexed, and he said, why? How do you not like Morrissey? And because apart from just having heard a very few of the Morrissey and Smith songs that they possibly would have played on MTV back in those days, I didn't really have an answer. I stood back at him blankly as if I was a deer in headlights, and I could not come up with an articulate explanation as to why I had this ridiculous opinion of the big dog. So I sort of begrudgingly grabbed the CD from him. I said, all right, give me that. Fine. You're so hell-bent on me listening to the CD, I'll listen to it, and I hate it. I can guarantee you that. So I took it out, I plopped it into my Discman, and I got to tell you that I was immediately hooked. To me, this is the album that spawned my fandom. This is the album that corrupted me forever as a fan of Morrissey, and as an extension of that, of course, the greatest band of all time, the Smiths. This was an album that for me is the ultimate life changer. That is why this is my favorite album of all time. One, because it is organically my favorite album of all time. I do think that this is the greatest album ever recorded. Now, I understand that for some people, this particular recording loses its album status based on the fact that it is a compilation. But to me, that has never really mattered. To me, this is the greatest album of all time. This is the ultimate life changer. Apart from it just organically being my favorite album of all time, it's my favorite album of all time because it was the first Morrissey album I listened to. As I just mentioned a second ago, it was the ultimate life changer. I probably listened to this CD 5 or 6 times in its entirety that day. I'm pretty sure that kid did not get this CD back until the end of the day when we returned home from Sacramento. And I was so obsessed with this CD after having listened to it one day that I literally went home from school that afternoon and I spent the entire night just obsessing over how amazing it was. And immediately upon my next opportunity, I ran out to one of my local record stores. I picked up a copy, my own copy, of the album Bone to Drag, and I have been listening to it in exceedingly heavy rotation ever since. Now, despite the fact that my Morrissey fandom began in 1994, sadly, I didn't go and attend my first Morrissey show until 1997. Now, you might be saying to yourself, hey, Jim, if you were such a big fan back in 1994, 1995, 1996, why in the hell did it take you so long to go see the big dog live? I don't really have much of an explanation for you, except for the fact that as soon as I graduated from high school, I moved out of my parents' house and I began going to school and working full-time, and I was just goddamn busy and broke as all hell. And looking back on it, that was probably the explanation as to why I missed seeing Morrissey back in 1995 and 1996. Because, for one thing, the town that I lived in was not a place where any musicians of his stature would ever travel up to perform in, and the town that I lived in was about 4 hours, give or take, from San Francisco. And man, I was just a broke-ass student back in those days. But in 1996, I ended up leaving that town, and I moved back down to, or not back down, I moved down to the Bay Area in 1996, and not long after that, 1997, I attended my first ever Morrissey show, which was on the Maladjusted tour. So what I'm going to do for you here today is I'm going to take you through all of the tours that I have seen of the big guy over the years, but what we're going to do with these is I'm going to rank them for you from my least favorite tour or shows that I have seen to my favorite of all time. Now, over the course of my 30-plus year Morrissey fandom, I have seen the big guy 14 times over the course of 11 tours. Now, you've probably seen Morrissey more times than I have. You've probably been a fan longer than I have, and I totally accept that. I'm not raising my arm here as if I am the champion, okay? This is just my personal experience over the course of my 30-year fandom, over the course of my 14 shows, which, although, like I said, there's a lot of people out there who've seen Morrissey many, many more times than I have. But, I'd say over the course of 30 years, not to be pat myself on the back Johnson here, but I would say that 14 shows is, semi-respectable. It's not a number that I necessarily hang my hat on. But I would say that 14 years, for me, is semi-respectable. Now, there's a guy who comes into my work all the time, somebody that I am very friendly with. I don't know that we are necessarily the snuggest of chums, although I get the sense that he's one of those clients who sort of wants to take our relationship to that next level. But I don't know, man. When it comes to friendship at this point in my life, I don't know if I'm really hiring right now. I mean, if I get a memo from HR that says, we can bring a couple people on board, I'll start granting interviews. But until then, I don't know. But there's a guy who comes into my work all the time. And he and I are extremely friendly. And one thing I love about our conversations is that he is just a music dweeb. And those are the people that I get along with the best in life. You and I don't have to agree on our taste in music. But if you are a genuine music dweeb and you can at least have a conversation that is semi-articulate and semi-intellectual on the topic, you and I will get along just fine. And this guy he and I both have artists that we are relatively obsessed with. Now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that this guy is roughly the same age as I am, but his band, his source of obsession is Fish. He's a Fish guy. And, no judgment. I mean, okay, little judgment, just a little judgment. But he and I one day, recently, got on the topic of our bands. He knows that I am a Morrissey wonk, and of course he is the obsessed with Fish guy, and that's cool. Fish isn't necessarily my luggage, but this guy is genuinely a huge fan. He's very knowledgeable. He's obsessed. And that's something that I just happen to enjoy when it comes to conversations with people in terms of their favorite artists. I always love to know who people's favorite artists are. Like I said, I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to like it. I just want to hear about it. I want to hear about your relationship with your favorite artist. It's something I'm just infinitely interested in. And he and I got on the topic of our two guys recently, and he asked me, he said, "Hey, Jim, if you had to guess, how many times have you seen Morrissey?" Now, I believe this conversation happened before this last 2024 tour, which I saw twice. So at the time, I believe I said I had 12 shows. And again, over the course of 30 years, 12 shows, 14 shows, I'm not sitting here raising my arm in victory. I'm not the champion, okay? I'm sure you've seen him more times than I have, and congratulations. I hope it makes you feel like a big man. But I told him, I was like, yeah, man, I got, 12 shows under my belt. Feel pretty good about it. Not as good as I would with more, but I feel pretty good about it. And he looked at me as if I was nothing more than a coffee stain on his shirt. And he said, "Well, Jim, that's kind of cute. Nice try. But I have been in the presence of Trey Anastasio over 100 and there's more. You hear 100, you're like, wow. That's a lot of bad music, son." But there's more, a lot more. He told me that he had seen Fish 180 times. And I thought to myself, wow. If I had an opportunity to see the big dog 180 times, I mean, to me, that's a no-brainer. Now, the question is, could you see Fish once? I don't know, man. That is pretty tough. That would be pretty tough. Now, not long after I met this guy through my work, and like I said, he and I are friendly. We are not necessarily chums, but we're very friendly. But one day after work, after I had had a conversation with this particular person, I don't know if I was feeling generous or just sort of he had piqued my curiosity or something, but I went on YouTube because I've never seen Fish. I'm not a Fish guy. That probably doesn't need to be said, but I'm not the Fish guy. I don't really get it. But one day I came home from work after having a conversation with this guy, and I started digging around on YouTube because I wanted to find a Fish live performance. Because not only this guy, but every guy I know, every person I know, I should say, that is obsessed with Fish, they've seen him all like 150 minimum times. And I always want to know, what is the appeal? Because it's something I just don't understand. I don't really get. Now, I would say that I am a fan of the Grateful Dead. I realize that probably, takes away some of my punk points. But I'm a fan of the Grateful Dead. I grew up with hippie parents, and it's just a band that I sort of genuinely like. And not to mention the fact that they're from San Francisco, which scores a lot of points in my opinion. But, man, Fish, I just don't understand it. I never have. And so I came home, and I found a video on YouTube. It was a pro-shot full concert. And I thought to myself, all right, out of respect for this guy, and just out of curiosity, I'm going to sit here, and I'm going to watch this entire Fish concert on YouTube. And I got to tell you that I think I made it through maybe 20 minutes, and I just could not take any more. So would I go see Steve 180 times? I mean, that is the easiest answer to any question ever. But could you see Fish once? I mean, if you could trade seeing Steve and Patrick Morrissey 180 times for sitting through Fish once, I mean, that would be pretty tough. I mean, it would probably be better than some shows I've actually been to. I mean, I've seen Dream Theater, son. Holy crap. You want to talk about a show that will make you fall asleep standing up. Go see Dream Theater. I used to have this friend when I lived in Seattle, and he was the Rush guy. He was probably the most obsessed with a band guy I have ever met. And that's cool. Rush is a band that I don't love, but I can take them in moderation. In small amounts, I don't mind them. I can listen to like one album, and then, I'm good for a while. And my complaint against Rush is probably the most generic complaint of all time. That being that I just... Geddy Lee's vocals. And I've heard people say, well, that's ironic coming from a Morrissey fan. Geddy Lee's vocals, man. But one time I went to go see Rush with my friend. His name was Scott in Seattle. And went and saw Rush live. And it was good. They were great. Especially if you're a fan. I mean, those guys just destroy it live. So not long after he and I went to go see Rush, he took me to go see Dream Theater. And the whole time as I'm watching Dream Theater, I was fantasizing in my head about me and my friend going out into the parking lot, removing our shirts and having a tussle. Because it was something that was borderline unforgivable. I mean, every single song in Dream Theater's catalog is at least 2 days long. Every song that they've ever written should be called Root Canal. Because that was one of the worst things I've ever Now, it's not the worst show I've ever been to. You want to go there? You want to get right down in the muck? The worst show I've ever been to is easy. Don't even have to think twice about it. Motley Crue. Motley Crue. Now, never been a fan. This is a band I don't understand how they had fans back in the 80s. But nowadays, I have no idea how this band even is able to support themselves on tour. This was literally the worst thing I've ever seen in my entire life. So I would go see Phish and Dream Theater 1,000,000 times before I'd go see Motley Crue ever again. Anyway, I'm off the rails here a little bit. I need to get this train back on track. Tell you that I've seen Stephen Patrick Morrissey 14 times over the course of 11 tours. So what we're going to do here today is I'm going to rank for you the tours that I have seen in my personal experience, dating back to, as I mentioned before, 1997. My first show of Morrissey was on the Maladjusted Tour in San Francisco in 1997. So without any further ado, we're probably already an hour into this sumbitch. So let's go right now. So there are 11 tours on this ranking list. This actually turned out to be somewhat difficult. I've actually been writing this episode over the past 2 weeks now, as I mentioned before. My wife and I have been hunkered down in adult mode over the past 3 weeks or so. So I haven't had as much time to dedicate to Archaic Records and my writing. So this episode probably wouldn't normally take me as long to write as it did. But this is an episode that I have been working on over the past few weeks, and it got pretty hard. Now, the top tour that I ever saw of Morrissey's easy, because those are the two greatest shows I ever saw in my entire life. We'll get there in just a minute, but going back and digging through some of the weaker shows in Morrissey's, at least in my personal experience of going out and seeing him live, was a little bit more difficult because really, in my opinion, and again, I'm biased, and I think anybody that is a huge fan of one artist in particular, they're always going to be biased. They're always going to see this person through rose-colored glasses. But, Morrissey, in my opinion, and I say this with a straight face, I say this with all sincerity, Morrissey, to me, is the greatest live performer in the history of rock and roll when he's on. And in my personal experience, I have been very fortunate in my 14 shows that I've never seen Morrissey just pull total shenanigans. I've never seen him do something that was egregious. Now, at this point in time, in my fandom, 30 plus years in, I don't really think there's anything that Morrissey could do at this point in time to alienate me unless he shows up at my house and burns it down personally. I don't think there's really anything that Morrissey could ever do to, alienate me as a fan. But I have read and heard stories from people who have been unfortunate enough to see Morrissey on nights when he was not on his most kosher behavior. And like I said, I've been fortunate in the sense that I've never experienced that. Now, I did have tickets earlier this year for the Anaheim show as part of the You Are the Quarry celebration. And of course, we all know how that turned out. Something that I wasn't super stoked about. Something that I was probably planning on traveling cross-country for. So, that was as close a call as I've probably had in my experience to Morrissey's just shitty shenanigans. But at least in my experience, over my 14 shows over the past 30 plus years, I've been very fortunate. So for me, number 11, the weakest tour that I ever saw. This was a show that I saw in San Jose, California at a place called the San Jose Civic. It was in 2014. It was the World Peace is None of Your Business tour. Now, again, as I just mentioned before, Morrissey was not necessarily on his worst behavior, but the thing about the show in 2014 that to me makes it my least favorite Morrissey show that I ever attended was, one, the album in which it was supporting, World Peace is None of Your Business, which, man, I can't believe that album is already 10 years old, over 10 years old now. That is one of those records that to me it still feels as if it just came out last year. But it's a record that I've talked about on this channel many times in the past. It's a record that I don't fully understand. It's a record that I've always wanted to love so much because the record that came out before it, Years of Refusal, is one of my favorite records in the second half of Morrissey's career. And for me, World Peace, although I do love the fact that it has a very sort of diverse soundscape, I think it's got a lot of cool musical influences. It goes in some pretty cool directions. It's just an album that every time I listen to it, I find it sort of turns into a little bit of a drudge to get through. And this was an album, of course. I bought it as soon as it came out. I took it home. I listened to it. And it's one of those records that, you stare at the speakers and you're waiting for it to jump out at you. And it just never did. And at this point in time, it still never really has. Now, I would say over the last year and a half, this is a record that I've developed a little bit more of an appreciation of. And, as far as Morrissey touring and performing live, it seems like at this point in time, he sort of retired this album. He didn't play anything off of World Peace in 2023 or 2024, which, as far as I'm concerned, you're not really going to get any complaints from me in that sense. But it's ironic in one way, because a couple years ago when Morrissey ranked his catalog in an article for the NME, if you go back to the archives of this channel, the very first episode I ever recorded on this channel was an episode in which I ranked Morrissey's catalog, and I ranked Morrissey's catalog and then compared where I ranked albums to where Morrissey ranked albums in this article on the NME. I realize you're probably just pissing your pants with excitement hearing this, but the point is that when Morrissey ranked his catalog for the NME, he ranked World Peace Is None of Your Business as his favorite album of all time. Now, I'm not necessarily accusing Morrissey of being ingenuine when he says that, though trying to wrap my mind around his thought process when he comes to that conclusion is something that I just can't. But I do think, although I don't think he's necessarily saying this to be ingenuine, I think it's one of those instances where Morrissey's saying something to deliberately be provocative, to deliberately stir up debate. Because if you're telling me that World Peace Is None of Your Business is the greatest album in Morrissey's catalog, I can't even begin to relate to that mindset. But the tour was good. Again, I've never seen a bad Morrissey show. The main complaint I had about the World Peace Tour was, one, I didn't really love the album, and two, this was a show in which it seemed to me that Morrissey, although he sounded good and I liked the set list a lot, this was one of those shows where you could just sort of get the sense that he was elsewhere in his head. Now, I've said this before, but if you've ever been to San Jose, California, it's not hard to imagine in your head that you're anywhere else. So I don't even begrudge him for not wanting to just, relish the idea that he was in San Jose, California. I mean, the hub of Silicon Valley. It's so boring. It's so uninspiring. The fact that San Jose even exists as a city is something that I've never understood. But the set list I thought was pretty good. Of course, he did hit the new album, World Peace Is None of Your Business. A little bit heavy, in my opinion, because it is an album that I don't necessarily love. Now, when I go through these shows, I'm not going to go through every song of every set list because we're not going to be here for a month. But I will sort of hit some of the high notes. But he did come out, and he opened with the song Hand in Glove, which I thought was awesome. I do believe that is the only time that I've ever seen the song Hand in Glove. He played That's How People Grow Up, Gang Lord, Speedway, I Have Forgiven Jesus, which, of course, for me, anything off of You Are the Quarry is, amazing. He played the title track, World Peace Is None of Your Business, a song that, as far as the songs off of the album World Peace Is None of Your Business, it is one of my favorite songs off that record. He played I'm Throwing My Arms Around Paris, which anything off of Years of Refusal is something that I love. I still think that Years of Refusal is an album I just never get tired of. That album blew me away the day it came out, and it still blows me away to this day. He played The Bullfighter Dies. Yes, I'm Blind, which, anything off Bone and Drag, I want to hear. I want to hear the entire album. Life is a Pigsty. He played Every Day is Like Sunday, which I've mentioned before, is my favorite song of all time. He played Earth is the Loneliest Planet. Trouble Loves Me. Awesome. Meat is Murder. I've always said this about Meat is Murder. I love the song. Don't get me wrong. I love the song Meat is Murder. I mean, it's one of the greatest albums of all time. But when it comes to seeing Morrissey live, even in the context of Morrissey, which, he's not up there waving pom-poms anyway, but Meat is Murder is a little bit too much of a downer song for me to see live. Whenever I've seen Morrissey live and he plays Meat is Murder, for me, it just sort of brings the mood down. Now, he always performs it well. He destroys it. But for me, I don't know, Meat is Murder is not my favorite live song. He played a sort of acoustic Mexican mariachi-influenced version of First of the Gang to Die, which was awesome. Anything off of You Are the Quarry. He played Youngest Was the Most Loved. I Know It's Going to Happen Someday. National Front Disco. I think this might have been the last tour I think I've seen where he really hit your arsenal with much force at all. I mean, over the past couple years, he hasn't really done much off of Your Arsenal, which I'll never understand. But one of the things that stands out most about this show in particular, the one in San Jose in 2014, was as he came out for the encore, the first song he played was Asleep. Which, as soon as he went into that song, I literally felt my jaw hang open, because that was one of those songs that I think, and again, I don't know, the Smiths and Morrissey fan base, as much as I love them and as much as I'm a proud member, they're sort of a hard community of people to gauge, because they aren't necessarily the most tight-knit. There's a lot of bickering and infighting and disagreements. But I would make the argument that most people agree that Asleep is just classic. It is a masterpiece. And it's a song I never thought I'd get a chance to see live. And holy shit, he destroyed it. After that, he played about half of the song One Day, Goodbye Will Be Farewell, before he was bombarded by stage invaders and he left the show early. But to say he left the show early is not accurate, because it was the last song of the encore. And, I've said this before about the stage invaders. I think it's something that's played out. It's not something that I love at shows nowadays. I remember being a little bit annoyed that the stage invaders chased him off the stage. But at the end of the day, it wasn't anything criminal. It was the last song anyway. And, as somebody that has gone to many Morrissey shows over the years, it's just something that you expect. Like I said, I don't love it at this point in time. It feels to me as if it's become sort of a kitschy thing. It's not genuine. It's not authentic. It feels forced. It feels like people are doing it because they think that they should. But for me, number 11 was from 2014. World Peace is None of Your Business. It was a good show, but compared to the other shows I've seen, it was certainly my least favorite. Number 10. From 1997, San Francisco, California, at the Warfield, October 8th, to be precise. It was actually my very first Morrissey show ever. Number 10. On the Maladjusted Tour, my friend and I were in San Francisco early that day, as was our routine. On days when he and I would go into San Francisco to see shows, we would get into the city early and we would hit our local record and book and comic book store haunts, and we would sort of kick around San Francisco. We would probably go eat, and then we would head downtown to the show. This particular show happened to be at the Warfield in San Francisco, a venue that I love. Looking back on it, of course, I will always say that I wish this show was at the Fillmore, because the Fillmore is my favorite venue of all time. Not only my favorite venue in San Francisco, but my favorite venue of all time. And I got to tell you, in 1997, by the time I finally got a chance to get Morrissey tickets, I don't think I've ever been more excited to ever see any artist for the first time. Maladjusted is an album that I love. I loved it when it came out. I love it now. This is an album I have said in the past, I acknowledge that it's an album I probably like more than a lot of Morrissey fans. But, on the sort of flip side of that coin, I've always said that Southpaw Grammar is an album that I like less than a lot of Morrissey fans, because Southpaw Grammar is probably my least favorite album in Morrissey's catalog, and Maladjusted, I've just always loved it. And the fact that I was getting to see Morrissey live for the first time, I was just literally floating. But my friend and I were up at the Tower Records, I believe it was on Columbus Avenue in San Francisco. Back in those days, the Tower Records in San Francisco was awesome. Say what you want about Tower Records, I don't really give a shit. I loved Tower Records, and I miss that place every single day. But my friend and I were at the Tower Records in San Francisco, and he and I were flipping through the bins, and there were a couple of guys standing semi-near to where I was standing, and I overheard their conversation, and they mentioned that they had seen Morrissey the night before, which sent me into an absolute panic. I mean, cold sweat city, son. So I ran over to my friend. I was like, dude, I think we missed Morrissey. I think he was last night. And so he and I pulled out our tickets back in the days when we had paper tickets. And sure enough, it said October 8th, the Warfield, San Francisco. But he and I decided to skedaddle it downtown to sort of see what was going on. I had to see it with my own eyes. I was literally in a panic. Now, I'm probably underselling it to you now, but this was my first show. And this was somebody that I'd waited about 3 years to see live. So I was dying, man. And we got downtown, and on the marquee it said Morrissey, sure enough. And there wasn't really many people down there yet because we got there super early. But there were a couple early people in line. So my friend and I, since we were there, decided just to hang out in line. It turned out that Morrissey had played 2 nights at the Warfield in San Francisco in 1997. Now, had I known that he was playing on October 7th and October 8th, I probably would have gone to both, but somehow it slipped past me. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not always the smartest guy in the world. In fact, I would make the argument that 9 times out of 10, I'm the dumbest guy in the room, you understand, but that show just happened to get past me. In fact, if you go to the Warfield now, though, which we were just there in September to see Johnny Marr, there is a photograph in the lobby of my first ever Morrissey show, October 8th, 1997. Every time I walk past it, it is a little bit nostalgic, despite the fact that this was my 10th favorite show in my Morrissey collection, because I got to tell you, this show was good, but man, it was brief. My friend and I, one good thing about us getting downtown super early was we were right early. We were right in the very front of the line, and it was general admission, and we got in there, and we got super close to the stage. This is probably the closest I've ever actually been to seeing Morrissey in person. And I remember when he came out on stage, I was just stunned. I mean, he's one of those artists that it still happens to me today. And yes, I acknowledge I'm a man in my 40s. But every time I see him come out on stage, I have the same feeling. I just get starstruck. I feel as if my blood is electric. But I remember seeing him in person the first time when he came out on stage, and I was really super close. I was just completely blown away. I mean, that's him. That is Morrissey. That is him in the flesh. I had the same experience when I went to go see David Bowie. I believe it was in 2003. I saw David Bowie. I think it was on the reality. Well, it was the reality tour, but I think that was 2003, and that was the only time, unfortunately, that I ever got a chance to see David Bowie. And I remember just the entire show, I could not get over how starstruck I was. I mean, I was just standing there the whole time, staring at David Bowie, thinking of all of the history that he had created, and the fact that that's him. That's the guy. That's Ziggy Stardust. That's Aladdin Sane in the flesh. It took away from the show at the end of the day. People ask me now, man, what was it like seeing David Bowie? I have a hard time even really recalling much of that show because the whole time I was just staring at it in awe. That was sort of my first experience, especially when Morrissey came out on stage, and seeing him in person for the first time. I was like, holy shit, that's the big dog. As far as the set list goes, what he played was actually really good. I thought he sounded good. He came out and played Boy Racer. One thing I like about this show in particular was he did hit, of course, it was the new album at the time, he did hit Maladjusted. With some severity, he played Satan Rejected My Soul. Billy Budd, All That Matters. Dangin' 'Em Dave, which is a song that, I've had this conversation with people in the past. Some people just love Dangin' 'Em Dave. It's a song that, to me, I don't love. In fact, the things I don't love about that song are sort of the things I don't love about Southpaw Grammar. I feel like that song is like all filler. I feel like Southpaw Grammar is just so much filler. He played Nobody Loves Us, which I love. Ambitious Outsiders. Reader Meet Author, which is a song off of Southpaw Grammar that I like. Hold On to Your Friends. Oh my god, damn. I love that song. Now My Heart is Full. Paint a Vulgar Picture. Speedway. And then he came out for one encore, which was Shoplifters. Now, I don't know if you counted along with me, but that was 14 songs, including the encore. What in the hell, Steve? I mean, that show flew by like that. I couldn't believe how short the show was. I remember my friend and I were leaving after the show at the Warfield, and my friend asked me, because he was not as familiar with Morrissey as I was. He's like, does he always play such short shows? I mean, we've been in there for like an hour. And I remember this girl was walking out next to us, and she was all butthurt because the show was short. I mean, it was noticeably short, sort of ridiculously short. And she was a little bit, butthurt as well. She said, that's because he hates San Francisco. I thought to myself, God, I hope he doesn't hate San Francisco, because this is probably where I'm going to be seeing him from now on. But I thought the show at the end of the day was good. It was exciting. It did not live up to all of my hype and expectations. I don't think that any show could have, based on how excited I was in 1997. But man, 14 songs. It went by like nothing. That was easily the fastest show he ever played as far as I'm concerned. And I went back recently, because I've always been curious as to why this show in particular was so abbreviated. And I wondered, maybe he just like destroyed it the night before. Maybe he played for 4 hours. Maybe he did one of those big Bruce Springsteen epic type shows the night before. But nope. October 7th in San Francisco, 14 songs. Now, mixed up a little bit. Actually, having compared the two set lists, though, now there's not a huge difference between the two, but I got to see at least, I feel like, the better set list, having not gone to both shows. Number 9, excuse me. Let's not get behind ourselves here. Number 9. I saw this tour in 2000 in Seattle at the Paramount Theater. I moved to Seattle from the Bay Area in 1999. This was my first show of Morrissey's after moving up to Seattle. It was the Oy Esteban tour. I saw this show at the Paramount in Seattle. It was a great show. One thing I didn't like about this show specifically, and this is on me, was I was sitting way up in the balcony. Something that I didn't love, something that for most artists, at this point in time, especially this stage of my life, I don't try to be super snippety about where I sit or where I stand. I'm just happy to see music and hear music. But when it comes to the big dog, I get a little bit more picky as to where I sit, where I'm placed in the venue. And looking back on it, it was not necessarily my favorite to be up in the balcony, but the show was good. This was an incredibly fun night for me. I had just moved to Seattle not too long before this tour, and I was hanging out with a whole bunch of new friends. I was very excited about life back in those days. And it was just fun. It was fun to go out and share Morrissey with my new friends. Now, I told a story on this channel recently. Another one of my experiences when I first moved to Seattle that was music-centric was a band that are much less worldwide known, that being the Mr. T Experience, a band that I love, a band that are in my probably top 5, top 10 favorite bands of all time. And I took some friends, same group of friends, I think, to go see the Mr. T Experience in Seattle not long after I moved there. And that was such an awesome night, too, because for me, the Mr. T Experience were really a band that they really sort of represented home for me. And, Morrissey's a global, international icon. So going to see Morrissey isn't as intimate as going to see a band like Mr. T Experience, a band that I associate so much with home. But the Oy Esteban tour was great. The Paramount Theater in Seattle is awesome. I had such an awesome time with those people that night. My only complaint would be on me for that one, because our seats were up in the balcony, pretty high up in the balcony, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. But this set list was awesome. He seemed to be in really good spirits this night. He played Boy Racer, Billy Budd, Tomorrow, Hairdresser on Fire. Again, anything off of Bone and Drag is something I love. November Spawned a Monster, Speedway, Half a Person. One thing I liked about this show in particular was he did a couple real deep dives into Maladjusted. Again, an album I love. But he played Lost off of Maladjusted, which is the only time I've ever seen him play that song. He played Swallow on My Neck, which I think is the only time I've ever seen that song live. Oh my God, I love that song. Love that song live. Alma Matters. Is It Really So Strange? Teachers Are Afraid of the Pupils. And then he played I Can Have Both, which to me is another deep cut off of Maladjusted, a song I love. Now My Heart Is Full, Meat Is Murder. Again, Meat Is Murder. Seeing it live, it just always sort of kind of brings you down a little bit. Break Up the Family, and then he did the encore for that one was Last Night I Dreamt Somebody Loved Me. Oh my God, that is one of my favorite live songs ever. I think that I'm trying to think, that might have been the only time I ever saw Break Up the Family, but I guess we'll find out as we continue on. But for me, that was number 9. That was the Oye Esteban tour in Seattle at the Paramount Theater. It was cool. Number 8 from 2019. This was my last show pre-COVID. It was the California Sun tour. Now, this was an album, California Sun, that I love. Still do. Now, when the California Sun album was announced, it was an album that I didn't really know how I felt about it because I didn't love the idea of Morrissey coming out and doing an all-cover album and coming out of Lone High School, which I still think is awesome. I think Lone High School isn't necessarily his greatest album, but I do think in some ways it's one of his most underrated albums. I thought California Sun, okay, we'll see. This is an album I was open-minded about, but not super, super excited with the concept until I heard it. And now California Sun is an album that I love. I still love. Now, it's hard to compare it to any other record in Morrissey's catalog because of the fact that it is all covers, which I also think makes this tour a little bit more difficult to compare to other tours because he did hit California Sun very heavily, at least at the show that I went to. And I've mentioned this on these videos in the past. Whenever I go see Morrissey, I do my best always to go into the show as ignorant as possible. But I remember on my way to see the California Sun tour, I was just really interested in what the set list was going to be like because of the album being a cover album. And, so I figured that we were going to see a lot of covers on this particular tour. And at least at the show I went to, it did not disappoint if that was your expectations. Now, this was a tour that, in my opinion, I've said this over the past 2 tours, 2023 and 2024, that I thought that Morrissey sounds better now than he did back in 2017 and 2019. And I gotta say that Morrissey, although I like the show and I like the set list, I thought that of the shows I've seen in my personal collection, this was the show where he personally sounded not the best. I won't say the worst. I've never used the W word when it comes to the big dog, but to me, this is an album or tour, I should say, that he did not sound his best. And he also, and I'm not saying this as if I'm in the greatest shape of all time. I am not Richard Simmons. I'm aware of that. But Morrissey's appearance in 2019 didn't necessarily look great either. He looked a little bit disheveled. He looked a little bit out of shape, a little bit unkempt. I believe he had this weird kind of mullet thing going on, which I didn't love. Now, I'm not a fashionista. You don't have to sit here and take, clothing advice from me, but he didn't look the same. He looked a little disheveled, I will say. And I remember after this tour, I started hearing people making jokes about Morrissey having gotten fat. In fact, if you go back and you watch the Simpsons episode, where they attack Morrissey, I mean, of course, they do it just to be as mean as possible, but they portray him in a way where he's just super, morbidly obese, of course. And that's what I remember hearing after this tour, and after seeing it in person was, oh yeah, Morrissey's gotten fat. That didn't bother me so much. The hair, the weird mullet thing, I didn't like that. I'm glad that that's gone. And as far as 2019, I didn't think he sounded as good as he has sounded in the past, and especially as good as he sounds now. I think he sounds great now. But for this tour he came out and played, You're Gonna Need Someone on Your Side. Anything off of Your Arsenal is awesome. Suede Head, Alma Matters, Hairdresser on Fire. Anything off of Bone of Drag. I Wish You Lonely. I love that song. I've said this before. I Wish You Lonely is, the studio version on Lone High School is a song I like a lot, but it is so much better live. It's actually become one of my favorite live songs in Morrissey's catalog. I'm Throwing My Arms Around Paris. God damn, I love that song. I love seeing that song live. That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. I mean, that might be the first time or the only time I've ever seen that. Lady Willpower, which of course was a song by Gary Puckett and the Union Gap, off of California Sun, Wedding Bell Blues by Laura Nyro. And then he played Morning Starship by Jabryth. Now, Morning Starship is one of my favorite songs off of California Sun. In fact, the first time I listened to California Sun, that's, of course, is the opening track off the album. As soon as I heard that song, I was like, oh man, I'm in. And the album doesn't disappoint, man. I love California Sun. It's fun. I go back and I listen to that record all the time. Now, I know that Jabryth is one of those artists that Morrissey just pimps all the time. But, I don't really get Jabryth so much. But as far as his version of Morning Starship, man, I love it. I love seeing it live. It's the only time I've ever seen it live. I didn't really expect, and I don't really expect at this point in time, for Morrissey to go back and play much off of California Sun after the California Sun tour. But, man, I loved seeing some of these songs on the California Sun tour live. Why Don't You Find Out For Yourself? Every Day's Like Sunday, which I always want to hear. I realize it's not a very deep cut in Morrissey's catalog, but it's the greatest song of all time. So, despite the fact that it's not a deep cut, I always want to hear it. I haven't always heard it. I haven't always gotten my way. If You Don't Like Me, Don't Look at Me. Oh my God, I love that song. Munich Air Disaster. He played Chain Gang by the Pretenders. Again, a cover version, which I think is much better than the original. I realize that if I say this, you might want to throw bricks at me, but I've never been a big Pretenders fan. I don't really get it. I don't love Chrissie Hynde's voice. Morrissey's version is so much better, in my opinion. And then he played Satan Rejected My Soul, but after that, which I love, but after that, Seasick Yet Still Docked, which I think was the only time I've ever seen that song live. That's a song you got to bring out of retirement, Steve, I'm telling you. After that, he played The Bullfighter Dies, Never Again Will I Be a Twin, and Some Say I Got Devil in Me by Melanie, another song of California Sun, which I love. And then he closed out the set with Jack the Ripper, one of the greatest live songs of all time. And then his encore for that show was How Soon Is Now. So for me, number 8 is the California Sun Tour. I believe I saw that tour in Chicago in 2019. I enjoyed it. Again, California Sun is an album that I like a lot as well. Number 7, from 2023, was the tour from last year, the 40 Years of Morrissey tour. This is one of the tours that I saw twice. I saw this tour out in Memphis and in Nashville. This was my first show. These were my first shows post-COVID when this tour was announced. Of course, I was extremely excited about it. I always am excited when tours are announced by the big dog, but I was extremely curious about this tour because I really wanted to sort of know what the set list was going to be like, because he was sort of pimping this as the 40th anniversary tour. And at the end of the day, although I loved the show, both shows, I saw the shows here in Memphis and Nashville, I will say that the set list turned out to be a little bit flat, in my opinion. Now, one thing I will always say about seeing Morrissey live, even 40 plus years into his career, one thing that keeps me interested and keeps other fans interested is, I think it's because every year when he goes out on tour, you have no idea what you're going to get in terms of the set list. I mean, I have seen other bands many times where you pretty much know exactly what you're going to get every year. You're going to get the greatest hits. I've seen Billy Idol a million times. He always does that. Echo and the Bunnymen, who are one of my top 3 favorite bands of all time, who I love. They pretty much always do the same set list. Devo, bands like that, they always give you the same thing. Morrissey doesn't. And every year, that's why it's so much fun to wonder in your head what he's going to play. And for the 2023 40th anniversary tour, I thought that the set list was a little bit uninspired. Now, it was a great show, but compared to what I had in my head, because I thought, okay, we're going to get deep here. I don't want this to be just like kind of his version of a greatest hit set list. I want to dig deep. I want to hear stuff that either I haven't heard or stuff that you don't hear very often. And I felt like the set list was just a little bit bland. Now, the show out in Memphis, he played at a place called the Graceland Soundstage, which was right across the street from the house out in Memphis. And Memphis, apart from Oakland, is my favorite city in the country. So I love going out to Memphis. That was a lot of fun. The venue out in Memphis was a place that was new. It was a place that had been built during COVID. In fact, I think the first show in the venue, which was Bret Michaels. Fortunately, somebody I've never seen live. You couldn't drag me. You couldn't drag me. Just put me in the guillotine. I think Bret Michaels opened that place. But I think it opened post-COVID. So it's a nice venue. But it's a little bit sterile. And especially now, you go see Morrissey now. He's always playing at just the most amazing venues, the best theaters in every city. When he came to Nashville, the next night in 2023, he played the Fisher Center, which, holy shit. Nashville, being the music city that it is, the venues in Nashville are just nothing to sneeze at. They are the biscuits. But the Fisher Center takes the cake, man. That place is the jugs. This place in Memphis was a little bit sterile. I felt like the crowd in Memphis wasn't quite as into it. And I got to tell you, I've heard a lot of people sort of quibble over Morrissey's current band. The show in Memphis last year was the first time I've seen his current band. I think they're okay. Some people get annoyed with me when I say they're okay, but they are. This is not the greatest band that Morrissey's ever worked with. He just released an interview recently where he talked about this being his greatest band. We all know that that's not true. He has to say that. I understand that. They are not the greatest band he's ever had, but they are okay. I thought in 2023, I thought they sounded much better than they did this past fall, but I would give the edge as far as those two tours to 2024 based on the set list. The show in Memphis, at least, he came out and opened with a song called You'll Be Gone, which was an Elvis Presley cover. I actually saw him do this song also in 2017, and both shows I saw him do this song, he opened with it, and it sort of had the same effect both times. It just sort of left the crowd hanging there. Now in Memphis, I sort of had a sense that he was going to play at some point in time an Elvis Presley song. I didn't necessarily think he was going to open with You'll Be Gone again, but he did, and it sort of left the crowd scratching their head a little bit. I remember people around me were sort of like, huh, what's this? And, if you know Morrissey, you know his musical snobbery, and if he's going to do a cover of an Elvis song, obviously he's not going to play Heartbreak Hotel or Suspicious Minds or anything like that. He's going to do something relatively deep, and I love the song You'll Be Gone. I'm a huge Elvis fan. Just a huge Elvis geek, so no complaints there. I didn't love it opening the show. The second night in Nashville, he did not play You'll Be Gone. The set list, both nights in Memphis and Nashville were the same, except for in a different order. Except for in Nashville, the second night, he played Our Frank instead of You'll Be Gone by Elvis. But You'll Be Gone opened the show. He played Suede Head, Alma Matters. Stop Me If You Think You've Heard This One Before. Awesome. That was another song. That might be the only time I've ever heard that song live. Irish Blood, English Heart, Girlfriend in a Coma, which, I've talked about many times on this channel. It's not my favorite live song. Speedway, which is one of my favorite live songs. How Soon Is Now. I Wish You Lonely, Let Me Kiss You. Darling, I Hug a Pillow, which is still, to this day, the only song I've ever seen off of Dog on a Chain. Now, on this tour, because there really wasn't a Dog on the Chain tour, and I hadn't seen Morrissey since COVID, I was sort of curious as to what, if any, songs he's going to play off of Dog on a Chain. I love the song Hug a Pillow. It's not my favorite. If I were to choose one song off that album, it would not be that. My favorite song off Dog on a Chain is What Kind of People Live in These Houses. Half a Person, The Loop. Sure Enough, The Telephone Rings. Talked about this before. A song I don't necessarily love. This was my first time Seeing it live, that's okay. I saw it 2 more times this year in 2024, and again, he played this song both nights in Memphis and Nashville. Didn't play Rebels Without Applause, which I found to be somewhat annoying. Not that I left feeling gypped, but a little disappointing. After that, he played another song that I didn't really get. It was a song that both nights in Memphis and Nashville also sort of fell flat, another cover. A song by Waylon Jennings called Are You Sure Hank Done It This Way? I don't know. I'm not really a big country music fan. I know Waylon Jennings is, sacred territory. He's authentic country music. He's not Jelly Roll, Morgan Wallen garbage. I get that. But living in Nashville, I just sort of get enough of the country, you understand? So I don't need it. I don't want it. Actually, both nights that song kind of fell flat. Even in Nashville, the next night, it fell flat, which kind of surprised me. Memphis, it didn't surprise me, but in Nashville, it surprised me a little bit. After they played Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want, Every Day's Like Sunday, and Jack the Ripper. In Nashville, the second night, Jack the Ripper was the encore. In Memphis, the encore was We Hate It When Our Friends Become Successful. I remember the whole night, as we were plowing through that set list, I remember thinking to myself, dude, he cannot omit Your Arsenal. What is he doing? What are you doing, Steve? And then he played We Hate It When Our Friends Become Successful as the encore, and I was like, all right, you hit Your Arsenal, but man, if you're going to pick one song, I Hate It When Our Friends Become Successful is not it. At least it wasn't You're the One for Me, Patty. So for me, that was number 7 last year, Memphis and Nashville, the 40th anniversary tour this year. Number 6 this year, 2024, the 2024 fall tour. After seeing Morrissey live last year, I was extremely excited about seeing him again this year. Now, originally, I had planned on seeing this tour twice, which I did. But initially, I planned on seeing this tour in Birmingham, and then the very next night, traveling out to Knoxville, Tennessee to see the show out in Knoxville. My wife and I did make it to the show in Birmingham. The next day, something came up. We had to sort of scrap our plans to go out to Knoxville, but then I ended up seeing the tour towards the end. The night before the last show in Chicago, I went up to Indianapolis, and I saw the show up there. Again, after the tour last year, I thought that this tour I was very excited, I should say, to see this tour. Now, again, I mentioned Morrissey's band before the last tour. This is a band that a lot of people don't really like. I would say that the band this year, in 2024, definitely were not as good as they were last year. In fact, really, in my opinion, the second show I saw towards the end of this tour in Indianapolis, the band, in my opinion, they weren't great. Now, they were better at the Alabama Theater in Birmingham early in the tour. By the time I saw them in Indianapolis at the Murat Theater, the band wasn't great. The second night I saw this tour in Indianapolis, Morrissey was great. He was great both nights, and he was great this whole tour. One thing I will say about the 2024 tour is he just seemed to be well engaged. He seemed to be having fun. He seemed to be on top of the world. And the second time I saw this tour in Indy, his voice was a little bit scratchier. You could sense that he physically didn't necessarily have as much energy as he had at the Birmingham show earlier in the tour, which, the guy's 65 years old. It's somewhat understandable that by the end of a run, even though this wasn't necessarily the longest run of all time, by the end of a run, yeah, you're going to be a little bit worn out. But he mentioned specifically the second show in Indianapolis that he was feeling a little bit under the weather. He had, as he referred to it, Flint throat. I think it was how he phrased it. I thought that this tour was great. After seeing the show in Birmingham and then having to miss the show in Knoxville, I just thought to myself, I can't miss the show in Indianapolis because I thought the show in Birmingham was awesome. The show in Birmingham was at a place called the Alabama Theater, a place that I had never been before. It was the Biscuits. The night I saw this tour in Indianapolis, it was at a place called the Murat Theater, right downtown, beautiful place. Now, Indianapolis isn't one of those cities, at least in my opinion, that inspires, fantasies of relocation, but it's a nice city. I had a good time going up there. I did that show alone. Now, the show in Indianapolis, I will make the same sort of quibble that I made about the show I saw in 2000 in Seattle. That being that for the show in Indianapolis, I was up in the balcony, not way up in the balcony. I was about halfway up in the balcony, but by the time I made the decision that I was going to go to the show in Indianapolis, I kind of got the tickets sort of last minute, and that's just kind of what was available. And at the end of the day, it turned out to be great. I had a good time. Not necessarily where you want to sit when it comes to seeing the Big Dog live, but for me, this was number 6. He opened the show with "You're the One for Me, Fatty." I talked about this on my episode where I reviewed the show specifically in Birmingham. You know, you come out, I always do the thing. I'm so excited to see him. I can't wait to hear the set list. I plead ignorant. I commit to ignorance when it comes to knowing what's going to be played. Then you come out, open with "You're the One for Me, Fatty," which to me is the ultimate, overplayed Morrissey song. That and "Girlfriend in a Coma" to me are basically the same thing. 2 songs I could probably never hear again, at least live, especially you go see Morrissey live. You're getting probably 20 songs. Oh, "You're the One for Me, Fatty." No! And I've made this rule that if you're going to play "You're the One for Me, Fatty," you're not allowed to play "Girlfriend in a Coma," and vice versa. So I remember sitting there and I was like, all right, we're going to play "You're the One for Me, Fatty," but you know the rules, Steve. You come out and you play "Girlfriend in a Coma." At some other point in the set list, you and I are going to go outside, remove our shirts, and have a physical altercation. After that, he played "Alma Matters," which I've said this before. At this point in time, this is pretty much the only song now that he plays off of Maladjusted, an album I love. But man, give us another song off Maladjusted. There's so much goodness on Maladjusted and I like "Alma Matters. Don't get me wrong, I like it. But for me, it's like, do we have to go always with "Alma Matters"? I've never seen "Ammunition" off of Maladjusted, which to me is the best song on that album. So come on, let's just retire at this point in time. Let's sort of retire "Alma Matters." After that, he played "Shoplifters," "I Wish You Lonely." One thing that was awesome about this tour in 2024 was he played 4 brand new songs, which I think was something I was definitely not expecting, but I think it was done in order to sort of, re-fire up the fan base for the new album. I can only speak for myself when I say that for me, I've really gone into bonfire of teenager drama fatigue. I've sort of lost touch with the fact that this is a new album that, I really want to be excited about. I can't deal with the drama around it anymore. So I do think that hearing the 4 new songs, at least for me at the end of the day, it really did sort of get me re-fired up for, the new album whenever it comes out, if it comes out. He played "How Soon Is Now." Sure enough, "The Telephone Rings," which I've mentioned before. I really like the song "I Am Veronica." I don't really love, of course, "The Telephone Rings." Now, the second night I saw this tour in Indianapolis, he played it, and I guess by that point in time, the song had sort of begun to grow on me a little bit more, although I still don't love it. But then he played the new song I've been wanting to hear, which is "Rebels Without Applause," a song I love. The night they played the song in Birmingham, they absolutely destroyed it. I was jumping up around and hopping. But I gotta tell you, the second night I was so excited to hear "Rebels Without Applause" live. But the second time I saw this tour in Indianapolis, and that was where I would really make the agreement with you if you don't like Morrissey's current band, that the band in Indy just didn't sound great. They didn't have a ton of, energy, and they played "Rebels Without Applause" the second night, or the second time I saw his tour. And it was a couple weeks after the Birmingham show, and man, they just really played a real flat, kind of lifeless version of "Rebels Without Applause." It actually turned out to be one of the more disappointing aspects of the Indianapolis show. He played "Speedway," which I love. "The World is Full of Crashing Boards." One thing I liked about 2024 also, which was interesting, again, he always surprises you with this, was this past year he really hit Ringleader of the Tormentors a lot harder than I expected. I don't think I've seen him play this much off of Ringleader of the Tormentors since that tour, but he played "Life is a Pigsty." He also played "Every Day's Like Sunday." The other new song he played was a song called "I X Love You," which I liked. I didn't love it. I liked it. It was better than, sure enough, "The Telephone Rings," but I didn't like it as much as "I Am Veronica," and I don't like it as much as "Rebels Without Applause." To me, it's a good song. It's very much a Morrissey song. After that, he played I Hug a Pillow, The Loop, All the Lazy Dykes, which I think that might be the only time I've ever seen All the Lazy Dykes live. Please, please, please let me get what I want. And then, for me personally, this is sort of an interesting song. A song of note, because it is probably my least favorite song of all time in Morrissey's catalog. He played Dear God, Please Help Me off of Ringleader of the Tormentors, and although I don't like that song, I never have. I thought it was kind of cool. He played it. I remember thinking to myself, this is awesome, I hate this song. And then he played I Will See You in Far Off Places, again, off of Ringleader of the Tormentors, and he closed it out. This was the Birmingham show with First of the Gang to Die. So, for me, this was tough when it came to the 2023 and 2024 tours. It was really close as to which one I liked more, but based on this year's set list, I took 2024 over 2023, despite the fact that I thought the band played better in 2023. And the band, they're fine. I don't know. Some people really hate them. To me, I don't love them. I think they're okay. He's going to sit there and tell us it's the greatest band he's ever had. He's lying. He knows he's lying. Number 5. This tour I saw in 2002. I believe this was the Greatest Hits tour, Best of tour. Not exactly sure, but it was in 2002 at the Paramount in Seattle, Washington. This was a show that reminded me a lot, looking back on it, when I saw this tour this year in 2024. It reminded me a lot of the tour that I saw in 2002, because on this tour in 2024, Morrissey played 4 new songs off of what was going to be his upcoming album, and in 2002, he did the same thing. 2002 was a great show. He was awesome. This was a show I was very excited about. Again, the Paramount Theater in Seattle is awesome. Now, unlike my first trip to the Paramount Theater, this time I had seats that were pretty snug, which made me a lot happier than the show in 2000, but he came out and he started the set with I Want the One I Can't Have. Then he played Suede Head, Hairdresser on Fire. Again, anything off of Bone and Drag is something that I hold in very high regard. He played First of the Gang to Die, which was, up at this point in time, off of the unreleased album, You Are the Quarry. Late Night on Maudlin Street. Only time I've ever heard that song live. Holy crap, I love that song. That's a song I never get tired of. And for me, this is one of those songs that sort of breaks my... It's not a cardinal rule, but it breaks the rule I have about super long songs. Seeing that song live, that's another song. Honestly, at a certain point in time, I never thought I'd see live. He played I Like You, which of course was off You Were the Quarry, Sister I'm a Poet, Alsatian Cousin, also the only time I've ever seen that song live. Little Man Now What, also the only time I've ever seen that song live. I loved this tour because he hit like the deep side of Viva Hate, man. I mean, that was a stroke of genius. In my opinion, he played Every Day's Like Sunday, The World is Full of Crashing Bores, Meat is Murder, Speedway, November Spawned a Monster, and then ended it with There's a Light That Never Goes Out. Call me Generic Jim if you want to. That is a song I never get tired of. So for me, that was number 5 from 2002. In Seattle, Washington on the Best Of tour. I think it was 2002. Anyway. Number 4. From 2017, this is the Lowen High School tour. I saw this at the Masonic in San Francisco, California. Now, unlike my trip to see Morrissey in 2017, 20 years before this show I saw at the Masonic, or at the after I saw the show at the Warfield, he played a killer, kick-ass show at the Masonic. Again, Lowen High School is an album that I love. The Masonic is, if you are unfamiliar with it, the Masonic is actually a really big room in San Francisco. It's much bigger than the Warfield or the Fillmore, and I was a little bit worried about that going into the show because it would not have as much intimacy as the other shows that I had seen of his over the years, but he filled the room up quite well. The show was incredible, and ironically, because I thought that Morrissey looked great, sounded great, seemed to be in a great mindset, the very next night after this show I saw in San Francisco, he canceled the show that he was supposed to play in San Luis Obispo, I believe in Paso Robles, which is sort of a weird place for a Morrissey show, I acknowledge. But a couple nights after this show in San Francisco were the nights he played at the Hollywood Bowl. with Billy Idol. That's what I remember most about this tour. I also do remember, if I'm not mistaken, that this tour had sort of been plagued with some of his shenanigans before I got a chance to see him. There was rumors that this show might get canceled because he was misbehaving a little bit, but the show went off awesome. He started this show off with that same Elvis song. He started the show off in 2023, You'll Be Gone. Pretty much had the same result this night as it did in Memphis. The crowd was just sort of left sitting on their thumbs the whole time. After that, he played the song, I Started Something I Couldn't Finish. Glamorous Glue, which I think might be the only time that I've ever seen Glamorous Glue. I Wish You Lonely, again, a song off of this album that isn't necessarily one of my favorite songs in terms of the studio, but it is one of my favorite live songs at this point in time. Kiss Me a Lot, Jackie's Only Happy When She's Up on the Stage. That's the only time I've ever seen that song live. When You Open Your Legs, another song that was the only time I've ever seen live. How Soon Is Now. Spent the Day in Bed. To me, one of the greatest singles that he's done over the past decade. One of the greatest songs he's done in the past 10 years. It's the only time I've ever seen that song live as well. Surprising at this point in time that he doesn't play Spent the Day in Bed more, because I think that it is a song that is held in very high regard. He played Home as a Question Mark. The Bullfighter Dies. My Love, I Do Anything for You. I love that song. I think that's the only time I've ever seen that song live. Throwing My Arms Around Paris. This was the first time I ever saw him play Back on the Chain Gang by the Pretenders. All the Young People Must Fall in Love. Speedway. The title track off of World Peace. Meat is Murder. Every Day's Like Sunday. And then for the encore, he came out and he played Suede Head and Shoplifters of the World, which I liked. As far as an encore goes, I feel like that's a relatively sort of generic encore, but that show was awesome. And I love the Masonic. Actually, one of my favorite shows I've ever been to ever was a show I went to at the Masonic. My wife bought me front row center tickets to see Echo and the Bunnymen at the Masonic not long before we ended up moving out of California. Echo and the Bunnymen are my third favorite band of all time. We also saw the band Placebo there, who I love. That's a band that my wife and I actually agree on. Can you imagine? Number 3 from 2009. I believe it was the Swords Tour when it came to Seattle. I don't think, now I have to think back, but I don't believe that the Years of Refusal Tour came to Seattle. So in 2009, when Morrissey came to Seattle at the Paramount Theater. No, this was the Moore. This was actually at the Moore Theater, which is a place I love too. I like the Paramount better, but this was at the Moore Theater in Seattle. I believe it was on the Swords Tour, because I don't think... Sometimes I have to check my memory, but sometimes I think that it was that the Years of Refusal Tour did not come to Seattle. So I believe it was Swords, and I love both. I mean, 2009 was a pretty stellar year for the Big Dog, because Years of Refusal to me is a classic. And to me, Swords is just as good in most ways. But this show was at the Moore Theater. Number 3 for me. If this was the greatest show I ever saw, it would be pretty snug, but we got a couple ahead of it. He came out, he opened this tour with This Charming Man. The only time I've ever seen the song live by Morrissey. I've seen it played by Johnny Marr, and I was thinking about 2009 too. The band he had in 2009 were the Jugs. Now, you play This Charming Man without Johnny Marr, it doesn't sound the same. Now, I've said this before, This Charming Man to me isn't the greatest song of all time, but it is a perfect song. A song I never get tired of. Can't believe I didn't see it until 2009. He played Black Cloud, When Last I Spoke to Carol. Probably the only time I've ever seen that song. Is It Really So Strange? Gang Lord, Throwing My Arms Around Paris. Ask. I think that was the only time I ever got a chance to see Ask. Irish Blood, English Heart, One Day Goodbye Will Be Farewell. Death at One's Elbow, which I know for a fact is the only time I've ever seen that song. Because of My Poor Education, another one that's the only time I've ever seen live. Cemetery Gates, Crashing Boars. Why Don't You Find Out for Yourself? Teenage Dad and His Estate. Something else. Another song I've only heard once. How Soon Is Now? The Loop. Don't Make Fun of Daddy's Voice. Another song I've only heard once. I'm Okay by Myself. Arguably one of the greatest songs on the album Years of Refusal, which is just chock full of the groceries, and he did the encore for that one. Was something is squeezing my skull. Why doesn't Morrissey hit Ringleader of the Tormentors heavier at this point in time? Because that album is the biscuits. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't have access to the big guy. Sorry. Anyway, number 2. Got to get this thing moving. We're pushing up on an hour and a half here, son. So, number 2 from 2007. I actually saw this in 2007. It was either the Ringleader of the Tormentors tour or it was the Greatest Hits tour. I don't remember which one specifically, but Ringleader of the Tormentors was the current album, and I loved this effing tour. Now, Ringleader of the Tormentors, the album, we've talked about. To me, it's a little bit disappointing. We don't have all the time in the world today to go into the greatest depth, but we've had this conversation. But this tour was the jugs. He was breathing fire on this tour. This was another show that I saw at the Paramount in Seattle, Washington. And again, coming off of the You Are the Quarry tour, which is coming up, for 2, and we haven't gotten there yet. You sort of see where we're going. But man, seeing Ringleader of the Tormentors or the Greatest Hits tour, whichever one this was in 2007, I don't remember specifically, but man, this album, or this tour, this live show blew my head off. If You Were the Quarry tour made you think to yourself, wow, Morrissey's pretty good live, but I need to have it proven to me once again. I'm still a little bit of a non-believer. Boom! 2007, Seattle, Washington. Opened the show with the song Queen is Dead. When I wrote my Dream Morrissey set list, I based the fact that I put the Queen is Dead as number 1 based on seeing him open this show with the Queen is Dead. It's the greatest opening song to any show I've ever been to, ever. It grabs you by the seeds and it gives him a nice, firm squeeze, son. After that, he played First of the Gang to Die. Youngest is the Most Loved. You Have Killed Me. Disappointed. Holy shit. Only time I've ever seen Disappointed live. All You Need Is Me. Man, I love it. I'll See You in Far Off Places. Lucky Lisp. I think that's the only time I've ever seen Lucky Lisp. Gang Lord. National Front Disco. Holy crap. I think I am experiencing a fair amount of chubbage right about now at this point in the show. Boy with a Thorn in His Side. Change My Plea to Guilty. Or Days Like Sunday. In the Future When All's Well. I think that's the only time I've ever seen that song live. Let Me Kiss You. Life is a Pigsty. How Soon Is Now. I Just Want to See the Boy Happy. And he ended the show with a 2-part or 2-song encore. Please, please, please let me get what I want. And You're Gonna Need Someone on Your Side, which I believe that's the only time I've ever seen that song live. Number 1. There's so much I could say about this tour, but we're really pushing up on the time limit here. So let me just say this. I've never in my life, before or since, experienced a tour like the 2004 You Are the Quarry tour by Mr. Stephen Patrick Morrissey. I can't even imagine it in my head at this point in time that any show, even by the big dog, would ever come close to You Are the Quarry. These were the 2 greatest shows I ever saw in my entire life. Morrissey had resurrected his career. He had reignited the passion of the fan base, and he was re-engaged himself to a level that when he came out on stage, he was literally breathing fire. The man that is, in my opinion, the greatest performer in the history of rock and roll, live when he's on. I've never seen him more on. I've never seen anything that even touched these 2 You Are the Quarry shows that I went to. And if you're somewhat of a newer fan, somewhat younger, and you don't remember how huge You Are the Quarry was among the fans, even among non-fans, even among just music fans, You Are the Quarry came out and it just blew the world's head off. I mean, this album, again, to me, I talked about this earlier with Bone and Drag. the ultimate life changer. Now, in 2004, my passion hadn't died, but it had been 7 years since Morrissey had released a new album. And for some people, not me, but for some people, Maladjusted left them a little bit unsatisfied. But when You Were the Quarry came out, it surpassed everybody's hope, everybody's expectation. It reignited everybody's passion, including his, for this man's music. And this tour was just the best. It was the greatest shows I've ever seen in my life. Go back and listen to the Live at Earl's Court album. Go back and watch Who Put the M in Manchester. You can't escape that this was the greatest tour of all time that I ever saw. Now, going back and seeing Morrissey with the Smiths and Morrissey in the early 90s, those are bucket list time machine scenarios as far as I'm concerned. But for me, this was it, man. This was the tour. 2 greatest shows I ever saw in my entire life. I saw this show once at the Aragon in Chicago, which, man, you talk about a city that's got the jug music venues. I mean, holy shit, the Aragon in Chicago was awesome. My favorite venue in Chicago is the Metro, but I saw some awesome shows at the Aragon. I also saw some not awesome shows at the Aragon. I saw Slayer there, one of the worst bands of all time. I had a girlfriend at the time. I've always had friends that like Slayer, so for some reason I've seen Slayer probably like 10 times. I don't even like Slayer. In fact, I really don't like Slayer, but I saw them there with Hatebreed too. Can you imagine? Ugh. Anyway, I'll go through the set list real quick. It was just the best. Greatest 2 shows I ever saw in my entire life. This was the Aragon show in Chicago. He played How Soon Is Now, First of the Gang to Die, November Spawned a Monster, I Like You, Crashing Boars, Such a Little Thing. The only time I've ever seen that song live, Don't Make Fun of Daddy's Voice, Big Mouth Strikes Again, which I think is the only time I've ever seen that song live, I Have Forgiven Jesus, Rubber Ring, Irish Blood. How Can You Possibly Know How I Feel? God damn, this set list was the jugs. The More You Ignore Me, which, looking back on it, having gone through all of these set lists over the past few weeks, the only time I've ever seen that song live. I kind of forgotten that I've only seen that song live. It actually surprises me because it's such a big song. I like it. It was good live. Every Day's Like Sunday. You Know I Couldn't Last, and the encore was There's a Light That Never Goes Out. So, for me, 2004, You Were the Quarry, the 2 greatest shows I've ever seen. If you have an opportunity to see Morrissey before he calls it a career, in my experience, man, you got to do it. As I mentioned earlier, a long time ago, beginning of this episode, I have 14 shows under my belt. It is my goal at this point in time to hit 6 more. I think as a lifelong diehard fan, I deserve that. I deserve 20 shows. Anything beyond that, to me, would be mushroom gravy. And, you know, based on what we're seeing over the past 2 tours, as long as he keeps playing at a reasonably high level, which he is, I don't see how that goal is necessarily unattainable. Now, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Morrissey has recently announced 3 shows in Los Angeles at the end of this year on December 28th, 29th, and 31st. Sadly, I will not be in attendance at those shows, although it is my instinct. And I did have tickets for the Anaheim show earlier this year. Steve! But as I mentioned earlier, my wife and I are in the midst of some real serious adulting going on around here, so I can't really justify it. Though it is my instinct to go out to Los Angeles and spend New Year's Eve with the big dog. But hey, I had a pretty good year. I got a chance to see him twice. So anyway, if you are going out to those shows in Los Angeles, I'm a little bit jealous, son. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. I know it got a little bit long-winded this week, but I do apologize. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store like Variety Records in Columbia, Tennessee, a place that I have been in the past couple of weeks. It is the Jugs. Be sure to check back most weeks for Morrissey Monday, a celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And I guess, unless I'm mistaken, that's just about gonna do her. So until next time, my friends, talk to you then.